Greetings, colleagues. Welcome to the Ivory Attic. I'm Ian Isherwood.
And I'm Kurt Andreessen.
And we are really lucky to have to start our new year with a new interview, right,
Absolutely,
Kurt?
yeah.
Yeah, kind of new year. I mean,
Yeah.
right? It's been a few weeks.
And this, I will say, this is a person who, from the beginning when we started our podcast, we knew we were going to interview eventually. So this has been building up for actually like 2 years now. So just so you know. All right, who is it?
So we are honored to have Professor Steve Gimbel, who's a professor in philosophy and religious studies here at Gettysburg College. Steve has a BA in physics and philosophy from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, an MA from Johns Hopkins, and a PhD from Johns Hopkins University. Steve's research primarily focuses upon issues of the philosophy of science, specifically physics. That's interesting, Kurt.
Oh, yeah. Well, and with what undergraduate degree was that again?
That was, again, in philosophy and physics.
That's what I thought.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
His books, Einstein's Jewish Science, Physics at the Intersection of Politics and Religion, and Einstein, His Space and Times, have been reviewed by the New York Times, the New York Review of Books, and Scientific American.
Whoa.
Other research interests includes the philosophy of humor, which I hope we're going to talk about.
Oh, yeah, we're definitely going to talk about it.
And his most recent book, this might be your most recent book, I'm not sure, Isn't That Clever? A Philosophy of Humor and Comedy. Is that?
We've got a couple that have
got a couple.
We'll get there.
All right. All right. Well, welcome, Steve. We're so lucky to have you.
Welcome, Steve.
Oh, wonderful to be here with you guys.
Yeah. So we've wanted to have you on the show for a while, in part because when Kurt and I first came here as faculty members, we were all told by students just how funny you were, how charming you were, and how informative your classes were. I even had students who wanted to take logic to be able to fulfill their math requirement, which I always was fascinated by because logic's a tough course, right? So we've heard nothing but great things for as long as we've been here about you, Steve, but we want to hear from you how you got into all of this.
Oh, awesome. Well, this is what happens when you pay your student, right?
Yeah. So how'd you get into this? How'd you find your path here?
Well, I began as a physics major as an undergrad.
Okay. Yeah. Good start.
The big questions. Yeah. I mean, I grew up on Nova, on PBS, and just fell in love with physics. Carl Sagan. Yeah. And then I went to college, and in majoring in physics, I to this day still love it as a subject. But then I started taking philosophy classes at first just because they were fun. And then I realized, wait a minute, philosophy is really the approach that I enjoy. But physics was the content that I liked thinking about. And then I discovered, oh my goodness, there's philosophy of science. And then there's a philosophy of physics. And I realized, oh, there's the how with the what, put them together, and you get the Reese's peanut butter cup of my professional career.
That's great. And so did you, by the time you were finishing with your undergrad, did you know you were definitely going this direction?
Well, I had first done a lot of the work in physics and came to philosophy a little later.
Okay.
But as I would visit my physics professors during office hours, and I would see that, okay, we're working on setting up second-order differential equations that are approximations of a piece of a part of a bit. I thought, but what I loved were the big questions.
Really big questions.
When you do real physics, you're doing, very focused parts. And then I discovered philosophy, which does ask the big questions, but asks the big questions about the sort of thing that they do in physics. And so philosophy of physics requires you to understand the physics, to be able to do the math, but then to ask the sort of underlying foundational questions.
That's
and so
cool.
It lets me play with other people's toys.
Well, I tell Kurt all the time that what he does is very small stuff.
So one thing that I have always been impressed with, that I'd be curious to hear your take on, is that I will say, as a physicist, I have always thought and been told that we're the people who are really good at thinking about problems. And so I always thought of myself as a really good problem solver. And I remember the first time, it was actually at this college, I sat down and was talking to some philosophers who actually were thinking about it, the same problem I was. And I was completely humbled by how much better you all were thinking about things than I was. And it's just such like, what do you think develops that skill? Like, because again, like I think of, okay, we do problems and we do physics, but like, again, I'm always impressed with kind of the ability for, at least when I have spoken to any philosopher, again, that I've talked to here, to kind of get to the nugget of the problem and really see that.
I think that's a fair question, and I think a lot of it is pedagogical. So I remember as an undergrad, as a physics major, there was one particular course. It was solid-state physics with Robert Rosera. And I remember my friend John Lau, he was the guy who set the curve in every class, asked a question. It was about surfaces, and surfaces behave differently than the insides of materials. And it was about electron bonding at surfaces. And John asked a question. And it was the first time I had ever heard a professor utter these words. He said, "We don't know." Not, "I don't know, I'll go find out." But basically, John had gotten to the edge of, not only the surface of the material, but the surface literally of the material we were learning. And it was at that point that I had first realized, oh my goodness, up until now, every question had an answer in the back of the textbook. There was a way of solving it. And what you do in science classes is learn the way of solving it. And if you do it correctly, you get a good mark. If you don't, there's lots of red ink and you need to go back and figure out the problem. And as a result, as an undergraduate, because there's so much in physics that you have to learn before you can get to that edge, it leads, in a certain sense, to a certain frame of mind. The people who go on to become physicists are the ones who did that undergraduate work really well. And the way I'll put it in the classroom is often, if you're in a science class and you disagree with your professor, you are wrong. In a philosophy class, if you don't disagree with your professor, you are wrong. And so what philosophy does, in a certain sense, is something that in science you don't get to do until graduate school. But by that point, in a certain sense, the mind is already sort of ossified.
Right.
And so what we do is we work with, from day one, these questions where, okay, there's a smart person on this side, there's a smart person on that side. You can't, you can, but you shouldn't create a straw person out of either side. Okay, now let's be smart in wrestling with this ambiguity. And I think it's that openness to multiple perspectives and understanding that there's wisdom and insight, even in views you don't agree with, which is very different from the sort of way we have to teach science, or at least we do teach science.
Right.
So did you always think you wanted to be a teacher?
Yes, I've been a lifelong nerd. And for some of us, the classroom is just our natural environment. I don't know that I could survive out there in the wild.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. That's exactly what I tell my students, which is that I tell my students, like, I one of the reasons I went to grad school was because I was avoiding having a real job, and I've managed to do it for my entire life now.
It is exactly right.
I was like, I literally have never, except for the brief amount of time when I worked construction in high school, I've never actually had a job where I need to clock in at a specific time and anyone cares when I clock out. So
I used to work throughout high school for my uncle who had a pork stall at Lexington Market in Baltimore. And I was his Saturday guy, and, carrying 30-pound boxes of pig parts from the freezers downstairs. And it was and he'd say to me all day, "Stay in school or you could be doing this." I haven't left school since. That's real work.
This is exactly it. This is exactly what every single person that I worked with on construction would tell me. They said, "Stay in school. I promise you, you do not want to do this for the rest of your life."
Yes, and instead we get to just talk about the things that we love, our passion, and they have to listen.
Yeah.
Or at least pretend to.
Right. Yeah. Or reading a book counts as work, right?
Life is good.
Absolutely.
So tell me about your approach to the classroom. I've heard rumors that you begin class by telling students to ask you anything. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. So we begin every class, about the first 5 minutes, with, I'll say, auto mechanics to quantum mechanics, ask me any question. If there's anything you've ever wanted to know. And what's interesting is it starts, they're a little put off, unless there's a student who has had me before. there will be questions about, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite band? And then it'll go to quantum mechanics because science, students who aren't science students who are scared of science, but they want to know. It'll be questions about current events. It'll be random questions. It gets to the point where they will have conversations, groups trying to come up with Stump Steve. And what's wonderful is, my undergraduate advisor taught me this. She said, you will never get more credibility from students than when you utter 3 words, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so if they do stump you, it's great because now you say, look, you're smart enough to come up with real questions.
Right.
And the beautiful thing is, I work at a college. I have friends who are experts literally in every field. And so what I say is, let me come back. Yeah. And I bring the answer back. And now we've all learned something. Yeah. And what it does is 2 things. One is it validates the students in saying, look, your questions are interesting no matter what they are. And some of them are clearly, meant to just sort of try. And even there, when you take those seriously, it's like, oh, that was stupid. He made something smart about that. I'll say this, afraid that I'm stupid. But what it also does is it creates a sort of the energy of improv comedy.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Where no one knows what's going to be said. And so it's live. And there's an electricity where it's not on the PowerPoint. No one knows what's coming. And that creates a sort of sense of being present that, especially for courses that need to be discussion-based, is really helpful. Plus, it's just fun.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, getting back to the kind of physics philosophy connection, I wonder, because I remember when I was, when you first started learning, especially about how, physics was done in the 60s, especially quantum mechanics, things like this, it was really intricately linked to philosophy, and that all of the physicists that were doing this were absolutely reading, especially a lot of Eastern philosophy, really, really interested in the philosophical implications. It's strange to me that I feel like we've really gotten away from that. I will tell you, I've had plenty of conversations with, lots of physicists at my conferences, and not once did they start bringing up the, philosophical implications of what we did. And again, I do biophysics. There are lots of implications to a lot of the things. So I'm curious what you think. Yeah.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we have a colleague in the biology department here who was fond of saying, I have a doctorate of philosophy and I've never studied any philosophy. And in a certain sense, that's right. If you go all the way back, natural philosophy is what they called science. But you're right. I think now we are in an era of hyper speciality in such a way that we become siloed. And to some degree, we have to.
Right.
That is, in any field, right, the vocabulary and the concepts and the work is so specific that unless you really dedicate decades to some specific study, you're not going to get to that cutting edge. Yeah. But as a result, you're right, is that we have, and here at a liberal arts college, it seems like that sort of intricate interconnection ought to be what we focus on and specialize in. But we are certainly not trained coming out of the graduate schools in that, the reward structure in academia writ large really rewards you for talking to the fewest amount of people instead of drawing these broader connections. And the nice thing about philosophy is we are a prepositional field. There always has to be an of, right? We are a philosopher that can do philosophy of art, philosophy of physics, philosophy of history. As a kid, my parents never bought me the cool new toys. I had to go over my friend's house in order to play with them. And that's the way it still is. The wonderful thing is that there are philosophical questions everywhere because no matter what you're studying, there are foundational issues. Well, why should we think the way you're thinking? Yeah. What are the ethical implications? And so there are these philosophical angles, and in physics especially, because you're dealing with the biggest of big problems. Right. But in order to make scientific progress, now what happened back in the turn of the century with Einstein in 1905, 1916, with quantum mechanics in the 1930s, you had such revolutionary changes that you couldn't not rethink these concepts. So Thomas Kuhn, who was a he started as a physicist, but wrote one of the more important works in the philosophy of science in the 1950s, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, argues that normal science, which is done by what he called normal scientists, although if you eat lunch with them, there aren't very many of those, are problem solvers. And so what you do is you work within what he called a paradigm, which sets up, okay, here are the acceptable problems, here are the acceptable routes to solving those problems, and here are the acceptable answers. And when you do that well, you get published, you get tenure, and that's how the game goes until you get what are called anomalies. Oh, I took a reasonable question, I used the acceptable approaches, but I'm getting an answer that shouldn't fit.
Right.
And when that happens, and you either get large anomalies or a lot of them, all of a sudden, scientists have to do the thing they hate most. Philosophy.
Right.
They have to question the paradigm. They have to ask questions about how they do what they do instead of just doing it.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I think we are at a point where when you look at physics, not much revolutionary has happened really since the mid-60s.
Yeah, exactly.
And so right now, are there serious issues in question? Of course there are. And we all know, what the problem. But you can do physics while ignoring those.
Right.
And as a professional scientist, you are better off.
Well, I was going to say, in some ways, you're going to be punished if you...
Exactly. Although, at those times of revolution, say in the 1930s with the founding of quantum mechanics, they had no choice.
Right.
Because you had fundamentally different approaches that seemed to have different concepts. Turns out they were equivalent. What does that even mean? And so certain parts of physics just beg for philosophical conversation.
So what drew you to Einstein?
Oh, well, I grew up a Jewish nerd who liked physics. How could you not love Einstein? He's just one of these fascinating characters who not only is, one of the great geniuses of the history of humanity, but socially, politically, economically, a rebel, someone who is just one of these undeniably fascinating characters. And then, in graduate school, I took a wonderful course in philosophy of space and time. And, was just riveted by, and that ended up being my dissertation topic, where I looked at philosophical questions at the root of general relativity, where Einstein accounts for gravitation through the curvature of space-time. And then the question is, well, wait a minute. The way we usually understand it is Newton has a flat space-time. Einstein has a curved space-time. Einstein's predictions are better, therefore space-time is curved.
Right.
But it turns out that the way he gets the curvature is he jams two mathematical terms together. One is the gravitational potential, and one is the metric, so the measure of the curvature of space-time. You can tease those apart so that you could have a flat relativistic space-time with a gravitational field. And so if I could have the same predictions with either a flat or a curved space-time, are they equivalent ways of describing the same universe? Are they competing theories? If they're competing theories, which is better, but they have the same exact predictions? So how could you take two theories which seem to describe different realities and yet make every single prediction the same? Now, in the 1920s to 1960s, there was a group of philosophers, the logical positivists and logical empiricists, who wanted to argue that all a scientific theory was the set of predictions. And so they're going to say, these are just linguistically synonymous ways of saying any difference is just convention. Starting in the 1970s through, the late 1980s, there were a group of philosophers who said, no. Actually, if you look, the curved space-time models make fewer assumptions. And so by a version of Occam's razor, we should prefer it. And so where I came in at sort of the tail end of that is, well, the arguments they were making against the earlier philosophers may be right, but not for the reasons they're saying. And so the idea there is that, what I'm wrestling with, are these questions in Einstein's theory? And so I had my earlier fascination with, sort of the icon of Einstein. Mm-hmm. And then through graduate school with the physics of Einstein, and you put it all together, and welcome to most of my writing.
So do you find it more interesting writing about the science or the person itself? Or do you find them like maybe they're intertwined?
It depends. Yes, they are intertwined, but there will be times in which you're doing one, the other,
right,
or the intersection. So it certainly is the case that I love doing the technical stuff where I'm trying to unpack the elements of the formal theory itself. But what also is fascinating is, why did this theory come out from this scientist at this time?
Yeah.
Right. Einstein is not in a vacuum, right? He's responding to H.A. Lawrence. He's responding to Henri Poincaré. He's responding to a number of thinkers who were right on the edge. They almost were saying but they couldn't take that last step. Einstein did.
Yeah.
Why was it Einstein? What was in the air? What was in his background? What was in his mind that led him to see it slightly differently?
Yeah.
And those questions are philosophical. They have to do with the physics, but they also have to do with the history of ideas, the politics of the time, religious background. And so what I find fascinating, especially as, a philosopher at a liberal arts college where we teach a range of things, right, is these interconnections that far too often we do over-specialize. Yeah. And it's really in those interconnections. It's really in that ability to interweave these different ideas, that new insights and new depth. It's like, when you go to see a 3D movie, there's one lens that's red, one lens that's green, and it's by seeing through the different lenses that you get depth.
Yeah.
In the same way, I think that's true intellectually with all of our studies. Absolutely.
Well, and Einstein, I think, is a particularly interesting person to view with this, and because I will say I teach our relativity and quantum mechanics, for intro section, and I mean, it's very infrequent that I get that deep into, let's say, the background of these people. Maybe I'll give a little bit of interesting background, but I mean, Einstein, I feel in some ways you almost have to, because part of it is this interesting story of how his beliefs really in a lot of ways led to him finding some of his best discoveries, but also had him is the large reason he was sidelined towards the end of his career. And so it's super interesting to see this, that how strongly his background was influencing what he was able to produce.
That's absolutely right. And what's interesting is that, again, I studied physics as an undergrad, but it really was once I was doing the philosophy that I started to understand the physics in a deeper way, which is why I adore having science students in my classes, because when you learn science, you learn a name attached to a theory, right? It's Hooke's law.
Right.
But who is Hooke? It's like, okay, let me tell you the story. And in understanding the historical context and understanding the politics, how Hooke and Newton were enemies, all of a sudden, what you're doing has a narrative connected to it instead of just a set of equations to solve. And it's often the science students in having this deeper experience, in historicizing, in placing it in this larger, and I'll use the word again, narrative, stories, that it comes to life.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the things that a liberal arts college ought to be doing. But in science, in part because there is so much people have to be trained in a short amount of time to get to that edge, we often can't do that. And so I see, in a certain sense, my job from the humanities to come in and support the scientists in telling those stories and filling in that background. And in doing so, I think it's not only good for the humanities students who may be science phobic but really want to study science, but especially for the science students who now have a deeper appreciation for what science looks like as a human social endeavor and who these people are and where it comes from and, why was this so revolutionary?
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so one of the things that that I try to emphasize is to approach the past like you're a novelist, and to try to imagine kind of world building around the individual or around the question that you're asking. And it sounds very much like your classroom is engaging in some of that, right? That you're looking at research in that way. I mean, you can't take Einstein without taking all of the cultural influences and everything that's going on in the world in which he's living in. So I think that's just such a smart way of looking at the past, and in particular, looking at the questions in which you're looking at.
No, and that's precisely the idea. Is that's where the depth, that's where the fun is.
Yeah.
It's humanizing.
Yeah.
All right. So, speaking of your work, what kind of stuff are you working on right now?
So I've got always have several irons in the fire. In terms of the sort of project that we've been discussing in philosophy of science, there's the group I mentioned earlier of logical positivists and logical empiricists were a group of philosophers who really do come out of Einstein's work in general relativity. And many of them were Jewish, many of them were socialists in Vienna and Berlin between the world wars. And they thought that logic could defeat fascism.
Yeah.
And so these were people who tried to use philosophy of science to undermine, the nonsense that was Nazi race science.
Right.
Now, what happened to them is a very tragic tale. And when I was a young professor here, had a bit more hair on top, Wesley Salmon, who is a prominent philosopher of science, passed away tragically. He was at the University of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And it was a sad occasion for the entire community, but his doctoral dissertation director was a guy named Hans Reichenbach, who was one of the main figures in my dissertation. And I realized, oh my goodness, we not only lost a major philosopher, we lost his stories of that generation.
Yeah.
And so I applied for a grant from the college, and they gave it to me. And I had just serendipitously had an advisee who was a double major in history and philosophy, Jeff Maines, who was interested in studying both the interwar period with our Professor Bill Bowman and the logical positivists with me. And this tragedy occurred, and I thought, you know what, we need to save the stories. And he had training in doing oral histories.
Oh, that's great.
So we bought one of the early digital recorders and a couple of plane tickets, and we started flying around the country interviewing students, widows, children of this group of philosophers.
Oh, wow.
And we did that for about 20 years, and we put out the transcripts of those interviews. But what was interesting about the interviews is we weren't so interested in the philosophy. That's out there.
Right.
Scholars study that. These were people who, in a certain sense, were interested in dehistoricizing philosophy. Let's be objective, because they worried that once you start getting mushy, that is the slippery slope to Nazism.
Right.
And so they're trying to make things rigorously logical in order to prevent the rise of Hitler. But as a result, they ended up, in a certain sense, squeezing themselves out of the philosophy. And as a result, their stories aren't really told. And so we got details, personal details, backstories to some of these figures, some very famous, some less so. And I mean, these people, many of them fled the Holocaust. Yeah. I interviewed one person who his father had been one of the logicians in this movement who tragically died in Auschwitz. Oh, wow. And the first thing they did is everyone pulled out their family photo albums. And I got one of the first digital scanners, and they allowed me to make photocopies of some of their family photos. But he had literally a bill of lading for a train pulling into Auschwitz. And he goes, and that's my mother, and that's my father. He had a receipt for his parents' death.
Wow.
And these people were telling me these personal stories. And it was clear that they knew they had something historically important, but had no idea what to do with it. And here was somebody asking for it. And so over those 20 years, I got so much in terms of these personal anecdotes and insights into the people that what I'm working on now, and this is a project, like I said, I've been working on for 20 years, but I've got about the first third written of it. And it's meant to be a popular book, a trade book, sort of the nerdy beach read. The working title right now is Einstein, Hitler, and the Rise of Scientific Philosophy, that traces the biographies of these characters, of, some we've heard of like Bertrand Russell or Ludwig Wittgenstein or Kurt Gödel. But there are others like Otto Neurath who are less well-known, but who are just these fascinating characters. And it's an attempt to tell their story, to explain the physics, explain the philosophy, and just tell the story of these fascinating intellectual figures who ought to be heroes for the nerds of the next generation. And so
That sounds wonderful.
that's the big one.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I mean, 20 years is a long time to work on a project too.
Yeah.
But you've been working on a lot of other things too. I mean,
That's true, but this one has scared the heck out of me because I know I've got to do it right, and I got one shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the big projects. The other big project I've been working on for the last 5 years with actually my best friend from first grade, who is the executive director of Penn Faulkner. And that one is called Punching Up Jews, Jokes, and Belonging in America, where it began as a history of Jewish American comedy, but it's now turned into a history of Jews in America told through comedians.
Oh, I love this.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And so that's the other big project. So that's my other, research trajectory is in philosophy of humor and philosophy of comedy.
So who are some of the comedians you're focusing on?
Oh, well, we start with Rube Goldberg.
Mm-hmm.
We all have heard the Rube Goldberg machines. Well, he was really the first American comedy superstar. He was a cartoonist back in the 19-teens. He was famous at a time when really newspapers were the big medium.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden film shows up, and he tried doing movies. He wrote one, which flopped, but featured this group from vaudeville. And while the movie didn't go over well, they caught people's attention, the Three Stooges. And so what's fascinating is that you really see, Rube Goldberg, his father came from Germany and was part of this first sort of pre-wave. Then you have the Three Stooges, the Marx Brothers, Fanny Brice, who are part of this immigrant wave. And then post-Holocaust, it switches over and you get people like Jack Benny and George Burns, who become what we call a schlomazel, right? The sort of put upon little wimpy guy. Why? And this is really where it sort of, in my mind, changes. You had the Marx Brothers and the Three Stooges, who are agents of anti-establishment chaos, right? Every time they show up, they're just making a mess. And in a certain sense, these are immigrants. These are outsiders who see a system oppressing them. What are they going to do? They're going to blow up the system. And then all of a sudden, we saw what happened in Germany, and people went, oh, maybe we shouldn't be seen as quite so radical. And so what you saw in Jewish comedy was this rapid switch to Jews as wimpy, Jews as emasculated, right? And you see this sudden change. But then in the 1950s, once you get so many Jewish soldiers coming back from fighting in World War II, you suddenly get Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Phil Silvers, sort of a muscular Jewishness. But while they can be manly, they couldn't be Jewy until the next generation, where you get your Mel Brooks, your Woody Allen, and all of a sudden now in the midst of the 60s, where you have all sorts of, identity movements, some through music, other forms of culture, Jews do it through comedy. And so what you see, and it's been fascinating, is the ways in which Jewish comedy has changed over the decades. There have been a lot of scholars who have tried to connect Jewish comedy. And, in the 1970s, there was a study done that showed that 78% of the stand-up comedians in the late 70s were Jewish. 2% of the population, over 3/4 of the professional comedians. That's weird.
Yeah.
And a lot of scholars have tried to trace that to Judaism as a religion. And if that were true, Israel would be the funniest place on earth. And no, it's not. And so it really isn't in the religion. What we realize is, no. It's in America. Yeah. There is something about
that's what I was going to ask. Is
the
it an
American story and the interrelation of the Jews with America that created this interesting thing.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Which of the chapters have you enjoyed writing the most? I mean, they've all got to be great in their own way, but...
Yes, and they all have been, and it's been a thorough blast. I'm really lucky in that my co-author is one of the greatest schmoozers in history. And as a result, we've gotten connections which have allowed us to get interviews that never imagined we'd be able to secure. The big one happened just a couple months ago. We had a 1-hour phone interview with Mel Brooks.
Oh, goodness. That's amazing.
Oh, it was. 99 years old. And so we were worried. It's like, oh my goodness. It's like, is he going to be coherent?
Yeah.
Is he going to... He was so thoughtful. He was so insightful. He was, of course, hilarious.
He's still really funny as it's
Oh my goodness. And it was just the most fascinating hour where he was very thoughtful and reflective on the role of comedy in society, how comedy has changed. And, at the very end, we thanked him profusely for taking the time. And he had clearly had a good time. And at the end, he goes, I love you guys. Mel Brooks said he loves me. So I immediately texted both of my kids and I said, your births are important. Just know they've moved down the list slightly. They both texted back, understood.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's nice here, you can actually meet your heroes and it goes well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's not normally.
That's absolutely the case. But he was so fascinating. He was actually on the ground in Germany. He was part of an engineering outfit when the camps were discovered. He was one of the first people to learn about the death camps. And so I asked, how did you learn? And he said, well, we had a guy transfer in to the unit who had been one of those who had liberated one of the death camps. And he was describing, and he said, you could hardly, if you didn't see it in this man's face, you wouldn't believe what you were hearing. And he said from that moment on, he knew that war would never end for him. And so what you see in his comedy is this continued attempt to fight fascism. And here he is at 99, still being funny, but still taking the fight to Hitler.
Well, I think that's always been one of the things that I've been most impressed with is that, he then turns around and creates the producers, right? Which is like this absolute dead, like going straight at it as hard as he can. It's amazing. Yeah.
It is. I teach a class called From Tevye to Seinfeld, Jewish Comedy in the 20th Century here. And when we do Mel Brooks, I have the class watch the producers and I show the Springtime for Hitler scene. And what's funny is every generation of late teens, early 20s, they all think, no, we're the edge. No one has been as edgy as we were. And then I show them that. And they're like, oh, you couldn't do that today.
Yeah.
No, you couldn't. In fact, we asked him, we said, look, the producers is clearly anti-fascist.
Yeah.
Blazing Saddles is clearly anti-racist.
Yeah.
If we ever needed comedy as a weapon for social change, it seems like it's now, yet you could never make those movies now.
Yeah.
And he said that's true. And, what's interesting is, there are a lot of progressives who hear comedians saying that and just dismiss it, poo-pooing it as, oh, they just want to be sexist and racist and homophobic and we're not letting them. It's like, no, when you hear someone like Mel Brooks saying, we need this weapon and in a certain sense it's being taken out of the arsenal, it makes you think about it in a more intricate sort of way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because like you said, I think it can be such a powerful weapon against those things by shining, putting the mirror directly in front of it. And yeah, it's crazy to think. Yeah. What do you think?
I think we should probably move to our next segment, right?
Sounds great. All right. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. It's your job.
It's my job to announce it.
Yeah.
Our next segment is our quiz segment called Did You Know?
All right.
And
what do you got for us?
Oh, I got to pull it up. Hold on.
See, I was waiting because I saw that he didn't have his laptop out, and I was trying to kind of vamp, thinking he was going to grab it. But
this is why
kept looking at me.
This is why you're editing it.
No, this is definitely. In fact, I'm actually going to increase the time of silence. Actually, it's just going to be. All right, just a little longer.
Hold on, I asked it so many questions that I. Okay. So we have some help with our quiz section. We go to Dean Chat.
That's right.
Who is Dean Chat? Wait, Dean Chat's been promoted, right? Is Dean Chat now vice president?
No, I think no. I think provost. I think vice provost.
Vice provost. Vice provost. Okay. Yep. There we go.
Yeah.
So Dean Chat we go to for everything now. Vice provost Chat. To be able to come up with a quiz, because Kurt and I aren't smart enough to come up with our own quizzes, so we're outsourcing it. Few questions. There are right answers according to Dean Chat, but sometimes we override Dean Chat because we find their answers terrible.
Yeah.
Okay, you were at a dinner party, and somebody brings up the trolley problem.
Sorry, do we have a theme for this? What's our theme?
What's our theme for what?
The quiz.
It's philosophy. It's a quiz. It's a quiz for a stand-up philosopher.
Oh, okay.
So that's what
stand-up
we're doing.
philosopher. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. All right, good.
So you were at a dinner party, and someone brings up the trolley problem. Do you A, explain the nuances of rule utilitarianism versus act utilitarianism? B, suggest that the 5 people on the tracks are probably meta-ethicists and therefore don't really exist? Or C, jump out the nearest window?
I explain that this is why I no longer am allowed to have lab sections.
That's the correct answer.
So that's D.
That's the-
Yep. That's the correct one.
That's good.
1
point.
1 point. Okay. Prove the following is a tautology. Premise 1, I'm a philosophy professor. Premise 2, I have no money. Conclusion, I'm a philosophy professor.
That is indeed a tautology. It's a circular argument, if A, then A. So one of your premises is, in fact, identical to the conclusion, which is the definition of a circular argument, which, of course, is why I have no money.
Okay.
Good. 1 point.
All right.
Up to 2. That's up to 2.
Of these
2
are
total.
A lot of these are trolley related. Okay. Section 2, applied nihilism. A student submits an essay that is clearly written by ChatGPT. You feel the sublime. B, the absurd. C, the categorical imperative. Or D, the death of God.
Oh. I would go with C. So the categorical imperative is Immanuel Kant's meta rule. So for Kant, you have, he's a deontologist. There are absolute moral duties. But of course, there are an infinite number of possible situations. So potentially you need an infinite number of rules. You can't know them. But what he gives you is a rule to create the rules, which he formulates in 4 different ways and claims they're identical. And of course, they're not. But one of them is to treat people as an end, not a means. And certain people are more like certain ends than others. But in this case, clearly the student is being less than human by outsourcing their cognitive load to a mere machine and therefore treating me as nothing but an end. And therefore, for Kantian reasons, I can scowl at them.
Yeah.
We'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, final question. You are trapped in a cave. Plato specifically. I don't know why they had to put that. Okay. You're trapped in a cave. The shadows on the wall are just a PowerPoint presentation of your own CV. What is the good? A, escaping into the sunlight and realizing the sun is actually a giant student evaluation form. B, staying in the cave because the lighting is better for hiding your dark circles. C, convincing the other prisoners that the shadows are post-structuralist art. Or D, checking if the cave has Wi-Fi.
Oh. This is a fair question.
This is his next exam question.
So in this case, my CV will assume is true. And thus would be at least close approximating the form of the good.
Okay.
As such, it would need to be propagated, which means it would need to be accessible to all. And of course, it's up on the website. So without Wi-Fi, do I really exist?
Well, absolutely not. So.
That is the correct answer.
Exactly. Perfect.
100%.
4 out of 4. All right. Well, wonderful. Well, that was great. Good job. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk some fashion.
Welcome back to the Ivory Attic. We're here with Professor Stephen Gimbel, and we're in for our next segment, which is called...
Wait, actually, we forgot something.
What's that?
We forgot our question.
What question?
What brings you joy?
Ooh.
Well, that's an interesting one for a philosopher.
In my case, and I think this is true in philosophy and in my other pursuits, it's that which generates laughter. I love the absurd. I love comedy, going back to Lewis Carroll, who himself was a logician, finding nonsense by twisting logic, finding cleverness in a philosophical argument or cleverness in, a funny movie. I think it's cleverness that brings me joy.
I love it. That's really good.
That's a great answer.
That is a good answer. I love it. Okay, now you can proceed with your actual question. I want to make sure we hit that. We get lots of letters if we don't.
Yeah. We're moving into our next segment, which is what's your style? And style can be interpreted a lot of different ways. So what do you think your style is?
Ooh. So I'll often do this if I'm doing, we mentioned Plato's Cave a minute ago. We mentioned Immanuel Kant a minute ago. Both are similar in that, so for Plato's Cave, what he ultimately ends up with is a metaphysic in which there are these ideal, unchanging, perfect forms, right? Similarly, Kant has this notion of the categories, which are these internal mental constructions which create our ideas. And so when I'm illustrating them, I'll tell the class, okay, close your eyes. I'll say, imagine a philosopher. What does a philosopher look like? And they'll stir uncomfortably, and somebody will say glasses. And then somebody else will say beard. Somebody else will say balding with a ponytail. And then it'll go silent. And I will then say, okay, what is the philosopher wearing on their feet? And I will look down, and the entire room will laugh and say Birkenstocks. And I admit, I say, yes, I get it. I am a cartoon character. I am the stereotypical philosopher. And so, in a sense, I suppose cartoon might be my style.
I think that's really good though, because I think and I think both Ian and I enjoy this as well. I think in our class is that it's the realization that you can always create a bit just with your clothes. And so, I mean, why would you miss that opportunity?
I think that's absolutely right.
Because then you don't even have to start talking before you've already got people smiling, right?
It's absolutely true. So this is the first day of classes, and I'm wearing a bright lime green shirt and black pants. And I walk in today, and before I do anything in class, I go, why is this guy dressed like a Thin Mint? And instantly, the class said, okay, we know where we are now.
That's great. I love that. I mean, because I think this is one of the reasons we actually started this, this segment actually, is because this is something I think we both think about a lot. It's that one of the fun things about style is that you can constantly use it to do things, right? And even when you're, even if your choice is just to put on, a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, that's great. But make sure it's doing something for you. You're hopefully what you're trying to project now is hey, I'm just a casual person here, right? So I like that. I like the humor-based type of dressing. It's good. Yeah.
I mean, Kurt and I both go for unapproachable.
Exactly. As unapproachable as possible.
It's funny because as you were saying that it's all a bit, that I give this look sometimes, and my wife hates it because it's a look that I give Kurt a lot, which is I'm trying to understand what he's saying.
Hate it too.
So it's a very serious look. But when you're dressed the way that Kurt and I dress, and you're giving someone that look, it looks like a WTF face you're giving them, right? And so sometimes they start to panic in the classroom, and I'll be looking at them like that, and I'm like, I'm just trying to understand where you're going with this, but then they start to panic, and it gets worse, and then they're like, why are you looking at me like this?
And then you're scowling worse, and then
Oh, it absolutely has an effect.
It does.
So I tried to do stand-up comedy for several years. Thankfully, I kept my day job. But I had a former student come to one of my gigs, and afterwards he said to me, I see you up there, and all I could see is a philosophy professor. I thought, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing, because professors are authority figures.
Yeah.
Which, in a bar, which is where comedy is done, these are generally college students.
Oh, yeah. So you're already starting
hierarchy. And so from that point on, I immediately went to tie-dyed T-shirts. I let my hair down. It's like, okay, I'll be a hippie, because you can laugh at a hippie in which, as opposed to a professor.
Yeah.
And you're right. It does have that effect on people. There is that initial subconscious priming of relation, which will affect the nature of the relationship.
Yeah, no, that's very true. What did Bruce Larson say when he goes to the dentist? He tells him he's a mathematician.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it.
Because if he says he's a political scientist, that opens it up. No, I had a veterinarian once, it was a vet tech who said to me, I went in and she said, what do you do? I said, I'm a historian. And she goes, that's a job? And I'm sure in philosophy it could be similar.
Oh, believe me.
That reminds me of one of my I'll just briefly one of my favorite stories about that is that my friend, when we were in grad school, was in the middle of doing a medieval studies PhD, and she was going to a
very difficult PhD.
Which is a very difficult PhD. And she was going to a conference up in Canada, and so had to cross the border. And as she crossed the border, of course, they ask her what she does. And she said, oh, I'm a PhD in medieval studies. And the border agent said, oh, so am I. Which, if it wasn't true, is one of the funniest bits.
That's exactly it. So we often get asked whether we teach our philosophy majors a specific course in "You Want Fries with Them."
All right. Well, excellent. Well, let's take another quick break, and then we will get to our favorite thing. Where are we going, Ian?
Kurt's Cocktail Corner.
All right, let's go there.
Welcome back to the Ivory Attic. We are back with Professor Steve Gimbel. Steve, we are in Kurt's Cocktail Corner, which is Kurt's attempt at trying to make something tasty and drinkable for all of us, but it's also his time to shine with the science and the mixing and the stuff that you do in the lab every day.
We'll see. Hopefully I've shined. So the cocktail name that he chose was the young Einstein, and so I was trying to reflect.
Einstein.
Einstein. Yes, sorry. Thank you.
Well played.
Well done. But so I was trying to play on that theme. I was thinking of actual Einstein himself, although also paying attention to the great work of art that is young Einstein, which that so one of the things that I always find fun, and I always, of course, tell my students, is that everyone thinks, of course, that Einstein got his Nobel for the theory of relativity, which, of course, he did not.
Right.
He actually got it for the photoelectric effect, for explaining the photoelectric effect. And the photoelectric effect is basically this thing where you shoot light at a metal plate, and it bounces electrons out of the plate, and then they go flying up. And they tried to explain this using the current models of light, and they couldn't figure it out. And so the one thing that Einstein helped develop was the whole idea of the photon, which was basically a ball of light rather than these waves that they thought that light was before. And so this is the whole idea. So I'm trying to recreate some of this idea.
Wait, that's what he got it for?
Absolutely.
That's what he got it for.
That doesn't sound as good as the other thing.
The other thing was so revolutionary that there were conservatives on the board who refused to acknowledge relativity. And year after year, he was denied the award to the point where it became an embarrassment. And so the negotiated resolution was, okay, we'll give it to him, but not for that.
Well, that's what they're doing to Kurt every year.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Because every year when they announce the Nobel in physics, I text him and I say, "I'm sorry, buddy, it wasn't your year."
No, it's all political. Listen, like that, if it, all of my ideas are too revolutionary, is what they've said. So I've tried to make a drink. I actually looked a little bit up on what Einstein himself, and he was not a large drinker from what I understood, from what I read, and there was a very poorly or completely unsourced thing that said he just enjoyed an occasional cognac, and I think which sounded as good as anything. So we have some. So what we have is we have some cognac with some soda water. All right. Now this is supposed to be a bit of an experiment that we're going to be doing, where we're going to recreate the photoelectric effect in our drink. So I know Einstein didn't do the experiments; he thought about them, but this is probably the way he thought about them when he was thinking about them. So what we have here is we have our drink. All right, and we have our photons in the form of Skittles, all right? And importantly, the Skittles are different colors. And so what you can do is you can send different colors of light into your drink and see which ones send bubbles, which are our electrons, flying up into our detector, which of course is our matzah. Which I wanted to honor. I wanted to honor the Einstein's Jewishness. So we're going to take. I'll use, because I'm a physicist, I know which one's going to work. I'm going to obviously take the purple one because that's going to be violet. That's our violet. Exactly. Ultraviolet's definitely going to work. And then we're gonna throw in and look, the bubbles come up into the detector, proving that there are photons in existence.
I love the fact that you have soda water, so it's leavened, and matzah, so it's unleavened, which is very much a sort of quantum duality.
Exactly.
Flat or not flat. It's both.
So anyway, go ahead and grab yourself a photon, send it in there, and then take a sip. By the way, I've also put a tiny bit of celery bitters in there, partly because I think of my mom was a huge fan and continues to be a huge fan of celery soda, which to me is a very New York Jewish drink.
Yes.
So this also is honoring a bit of that as well.
So the history of that is actually quite fascinating. So Dr. Brown's, which is originally began as celery soda, originally was only available at delicatessens. Now, the Jewish deli is what we think of as sort of quintessential Jewish food. But if you look at Eastern European Jews, really the only seasoning they ever used was salt.
Uh-huh.
And so Jewish food traditionally is actually quite bland.
Okay.
But it was from certain parts of Eastern Europe that they came up with pastrami. And the thought was the spices were just not good for your intestines. And so in eating these spicy foods, it was going to harm your stomach. And so they came up with a celery soda because celery was supposed to calm the gastrointestinal tract. And so the idea is if you're going to eat this spicy pastrami,
you gotta
drink some celery in order to counteract it. And that's where the celery soda
comes
perfect.
All right. So this is our, so and now I assume it looks like all of our experiments have been successful.
It looks like
Indeed.
Wonderful. All right. Well, then let's finish the experiment. Yeah, by the way, you can't do this in the real experiment. Just for the record, you tend to use very, very metals like cesium. So.
Oh, it's very tasty.
Yes.
Oh. Goes with the matcha.
L'chaim.
Cheers. All right, so that is. And also, I did want to mention the other thing is we're creating bubbles, which of course was what in Young Einstein they were trying to do with I think the atomic splitting the atom. Excellent. Well, I think we've done it.
We think we've done it. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming on. It's
this
great.
has been a blast. Thank you, guys.
It's been great having you on. And thank you all for helping us rummage through the Ivory Attic. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Blue Sky. You can find us on Facebook and especially YouTube.
Yeah, so actually, we've just been starting up some YouTube excitement. So if you haven't been there for a while, check it out. We got a few videos up there for what we've been calling Drink Responsibly January, where we're just giving you some nice little cocktail recipes if you decide not to forgo dry January this time around.
It's been a noble experiment that has generated surprisingly thousands of views from people.
Yeah, people like to watch us, which is crazy.
In short doses.
Because we definitely have faces for radio, as they say. So, but yeah, please check us out there and send us a line.
And thanks again. This is Ian Isherwood.
I'm Kurt Andreessen.